how delighted Tess and I are to see everybody here. My name is Peggy Deemer, and I'm here with the session's co-organizer, Tessa Ford. I personally am speaking from the homelands of the Lenape tribe, otherwise known as New York City. Specifically, I'm talking from Brooklyn. Before I introduce Quilian Riano, who will then introduce the other people who will be participating in the discussion, I just want to mention some protocols and etiquette things. I'm hoping that some of you had been to the plenary opening session that went through in detail the kind of expected etiquettes, but to just be succinct here, if you can respect other people's pronouns, speak with I so you don't pretend to speak for other people, be careful of how long you're speaking and how many other voices may not be allowed if you're taking up time and not being succinct. I also want to say that these sessions are being recorded, and if you do not want to be identified in those recordings, and they will be used by both the facilitators and the ABC organizers in the future, you can turn your camera off and you can hide your name, but otherwise we're very much hoping that you show yourself and participate with more than a black screen or more than a pasted up image. That it just makes everybody feel like we're a collective. But the most important thing around the etiquette is that we will use Stack in the chat as a way of identifying who wants to speak and who wants to ask questions. So I know that there are very different protocols that different organizations use, raise your hand, whatever, but for us, if you could go into the chat and say Stack, then we'll know that you're ready to be called on. So with all of that, let me just welcome you all to the session that's entitled Collectivized Pedagogies. Totally honored to have Quilian Riano organize this and bring his expertise and all of his connections to this particular session. And he will be the one to then introduce the cast of characters. But just to say, Quilian Riano is the Assistant Dean at Pratt Institute School of Architecture. He's also the founder and lead designer of Design Agency, a design studio exploring new forms of political design across fields of architecture, urbanism, landscape, and art. He's worked with many public groups on numerous community-based projects, and he has taught undergraduate and graduate students in many schools, including Harvard, Columbia, Carleton, Parsons, City College, Kent University, and this is just part of the list. Quilian is also an initiator and core member of Dark Matter University, and Quilian is also connected to many activist groups and across many different communities, and those connections will be put on full display here as he brings these varied collaborators and architectural workers together for this workshop. Let me just say also that Quilian is a personal friend, but I feel that in the infant stages of the architecture lobby, an absolutely essential colleague, and so I feel that the organization is very much indebted to him, and the success of being able to present summer workshops to you like this is very much on the shoulders of people like him. So anyway, Quilian.
Thank you so much, Peggy, and likewise, I think that both the relationship with Peggy and the architecture lobby has been a long and important one for me. So this is a pleasure, and also to talk about this issue that I think is important to a lot of folks, and specifically with many friends, collaborators from Dark Matter University, another collective. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for spending some of your Monday with us. We're going to go through, I wanted to just start out with an agenda so you know more or less what we're going to be doing. I'm just going to give a quick introduction to Dark Matter University and some issues. Yeah, we're not going, a few folks are going to present, and by a few, I mean close to a dozen or maybe more. We're not gonna have slideshows. We're gonna keep it a little bit informal. I'm going to facilitate and kind of give prompts to people to kind of describe some of the work. Right now I'm gonna just begin with the introductions. We're gonna move in and I'll give you a series of articles and even a full-on more kind of I like to call it the fire hose presentation that we gave at the ACSA that has all the information and tons of the work that Dark Matter University has done very carefully. Kind of, this one is more about the technical and processes of how do you people collectively create curriculum? How do people foster within that curriculum collaboration among students, among faculty, and more than often, almost I think in every case for Dartmouth University, among institutions, even when the institutions don't want it, and then it becomes part of just the institutional change. And so it's going to be a little more specific, so and more conversational in nature. I am going to ask that if you have a stack and you have a question, maybe just wait for that kind of this first section to be done. Hopefully we're going to leave a lot of time for those questions and to discuss your own ways of looking at it. You know, as a parting thought, I thought that the question that I think is going to drive this is the last one here at the bottom. What aspects of academia do you want to bring collective processes to? Now as an administrator, this is something that I'm also very conscious of. What are the tools and the techniques of bringing change, while also acknowledging, and this is both has been incredibly important conversation, both in the architecture lobby, as I have participated in those, and Dartmouth universities. How much do you work within institutions, outside institutions? What is the value of changing institutions? How do you measure, and how do these processes, you know, like everything, for example, from tenure, how do you, you know, one of the biggest questions in almost every school, and we've tackled and taught so tons of conversations both at Dartmouth University and the architecture lobbies. How can tenure begin to recognize more collective work, for example? It's not something that always happens. These are some of the folks that are going to be presenting. As you can see, it's quite a few folks. So I think that just to keep it going, I think people are just going to as we go in and start chatting, people are gonna just quickly present who they are. But this is an incredibly group of people that I think we were joking just in the prep session that these are some of our favorite people collectively. So I'm very excited to be here. Okay, so Dark Matter University was founded in the aftermath of the murder by police violence of George Floyd, and now close to 3 years ago, 2 years ago. Were a couple of people when the questions were going around kind of racism in our institutions. A few of us that have been having conversations around academia, people of color have been teaching in multiple universities, came together to talk about what we could do. We decided to create something called Dark Matter University, and the group of, depending on when you think it started, the group can be as small as 12 to 15 people that kind of had that conversation, up to 40. So it's a nice and flexible group of people. And as you can see here, the vision that we cannot survive and thrive without immediate change towards anti-racist model of design education. Existing systems have not been able to transform away from centering advancing whiteness through reliance on an implied dominant and racialized subject and audience. The impacts of that centering are widespread and can be felt in inequities that global extraction, racial capitalism, and colonialism have created. I would say that especially in much of the work that you will see, and much of the work that we've done since, and quite honestly, something that just rings in my head like a constant bell. Like I do have tinnitus, so I have sometimes ringing in my ears, but is this idea of the implied subjectivity of that our institutions serve, even if they're not straightforwardly doing something. They imply who, when we think architect, who do we think, etc. There, the majority of its people have suffered tremendous harm as a result. Collective liberation cannot only occur within the confines of individual institutions. Dark Matter University is founded to work inside and outside of existing systems to challenge, inform, and reshape our present world toward a better future. This is our mission, so new forms of knowledge and knowledge production, new forms of institutions and power, new forms of collectivity and practice, new forms of community and culture, and new forms of design. We're organized in a way in which we have a core team that is divided between people, content, opportunity, and a standby advisory role. By the way, we have monthly meetings in which folks can see what the organization is doing and sign up. So I'll invite you all to those. And you can see that even the folks that are here today is even a small number of the amount of the people that are involved, have been involved, will be involved with Dark Matter University, and that is lovely. And also, I think even it's a very diverse group of folks from the different fields, not even just design, that are having these conversations. This was a constellation of courses. This is now old, but I thought I would show it, that we take the Dark Matter University metaphor to its full extent, that we think about the things we do as constellations. We think of the thing as, and some we have more hands-on. For example, there are courses that Dark Matter University actually runs. Some are taught by our larger group of people, the rosters. And we make both folks within the team and resources that we have available. This is another kind of diagram, also old by now, but just to show the kind of interconnectivity within just even a small amount of Dark Matter University members teaching just at a few places, and the amount of kind of overlapping structures, systems, ways of teaching that were being developed at, and also the universities, the amount of universities and places that are being kind of overlaid and layered here. These are going to be some of the groups that we're going to be talking about. We're going to be mostly talking about today the foundations of design justice. That is and I can say this because although part of DMU, I was tangentially part of that process, not really like I was kind of moving from Cleveland to New York. I was doing many things. And I found the process from the outside of foundations of design justice one of the most fascinating processes of coming up with a curriculum and a syllabus that I've seen as an observer. I want to learn more. So some of the folks that are helped create that are going to be here today. Then we're going to hear, and you're going to hear that it's been taught at multiple universities, usually has to be taught at 2 universities at the same time. So we have the, and here you can see, we have, for example, Buffalo and Michigan were working on that together. Drexel they did that one by itself. But you can see that idea is always to bring 2 or more schools together and have those student bodies, have the faculties having conversations. Then the same kind of curriculum was taken, and for the first time, we worked with a nonprofit, Van Allen Institute, and I say this is the big we, because I wasn't involved with that one either and want to learn more, with Van Allen Institute, and work with the community members around Red Hook and Gowanus. And they're going to share a little bit of those experiences as well. And finally, the 2 sorry, I hit something wrong. And then the last 2 studios are going to be the 4 with, and then Cooperative Futures, contact between 4 of us, but also with Kent State University. And with these, we have invited 2 students to chat about their experiences in the course as well as the administrator that made it all happen at Carleton University, Osair, who's here, and we're excited that thank you, Osair. Okay, so now I'm gonna, if you want to dig deeper, because again, the idea is that we're gonna move a little fast and a little bit specifically, but I'm gonna give you 3 things that are gonna give you more places to search things out that you might be interested on. And it's first this article that appeared in the Architects newspaper. this article in Oculus and this video in ACSA. This one is the kind of the one. It's a year old, and so for example, the Van Allen work is not there, but I think it's still an important part. And I'll put all links to all three of them in the chat just now after I stop sharing. Well, and without further ado, and so that we can move on, I'm gonna get us going. Just give me 1 second. Let me just get my agenda up here, and I'll start putting links here. So first up, it is my true pleasure to invite Andrew Chin to share with us some experiences with design justice fundamentals. Andrew not only participated in the syllabus and curriculum building, but also as an administrator on the end of Florida A&M. So Andrew, if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself and just sharing a little bit of your experience with that course, and then we'll move on to a few other folks. There'll be about 20 minutes for this course.
Okay, but not 20 minutes for me, please. So, hey, thanks, Quilian. Andrew Chin. I serve as the interim dean at Florida A&M University in architecture program, and I had the honor last year. I felt like I can't remember how long ago, it was COVID times, but with Lisa, Jati, and the rest of the team to figure out how do we create one of these experiences. And we probably brought together two of the most unique places: students from Utah and students from Florida, a historically Black college, and a PWI. I have to say there's two challenges. One is the content, and two is the delivery. How do you get a course to adopt a program, a university, to actually do this thing? So I really just want to touch on 2 points. I'll leave it to Jati and others to touch on the content design of the class. But the question is, you can design the class, but if no one's going to offer it, that's another problem. And when you present this, and I would say to anyone who wants to present something to a university or program to adopt it, saying it's a good thing is not going to be enough. Programs only have time for so many good things. Look at it from the other side, from the administrator, the director, and the dean. How does it help them do their job? What are their priorities? So yes, it has the obvious EDI initiatives and helps it meets that, but recognize it also can help with accreditation. The new accreditation requirement, well, accreditation is everyone's high priority. It's a magic buzzword. And we need to begin to say, hey, this helps with one of the program criteria. Program criteria 8, social equity and inclusion. Every program needs to say how it further deepens students' understanding of device cultures and social context. The course helps as required, helps them understand built environments, equitable support to people of different backgrounds, resources, and abilities. So it's not a matter of saying, hey, this is a good thing, we and you need to do it. You guys, you people haven't been teaching right, we know what to do. It's, hey, we're here to help you meet your goals. It's going to be a win-win. We want to offer this. We want to help you meet your accreditation requirements, specifically social equity and inclusion. Yes, it'll help introduce BIPOC faculty because you say you can't find any, and you can beta test them. But hey, we're going to not only help you meet your EDI by saying, here are more BIPOC faculty that you've ever seen in your life, but 2, the magic word is accreditation. We can help you meet your accreditation requirements. That's what we will do for you. It's a win-win. So I stayed on the admin side and tried to make sure with Lisa that it could happen. And then from there, just stayed out of the way and let Jati, Chat, and the others do their magic.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Maybe that's a great kind of way to introduce Lisa and similar questions. Since we're hearing Florida A&M and Utah, I think the schools are usually not thought of as in the same sentence. So Lisa, if you wouldn't mind.
Yes. Hello, my name is Lisa Henry. I'm joining you all from the ancestral homelands of the Shoshone, Goshute, Paiute, and Ute tribes. I was a co-author of the FODJ syllabus, as well as the chair of the School of Architecture at University of Utah when it was taught. Certainly the administrative issues were huge, not only the accreditation issues, but I think there's a financial model that the university uses that's not conducive to this kind of work, right? The university is highly focused on individual work, and it's highly focused on paying one person to do one job. And that one person who's on the university rolls is the person that maybe has access to support of the university or has access to the electronic delivery system of the university. So having administrators who are really willing to really work with the DMU and really break open the sort of silo that is their institution was really critical. And with me and Andrew in that position, I think it was an extraordinary opportunity. The issues that come up, other issues that come up from administrative perspective have to do with grading policy, have to do with the sort of culture of the college. What are the expectations that Florida AMU students have in terms of workload versus Utah students have in terms of workload, and how do we create a curriculum that is pertinent for both of these groups of students? And then I think the other thing that came up quite a bit is that the student bodies at Florida and at University of Utah are very different, right? University of Utah, the class did have some diversity. It was a self-selected class, so there was some diversity in the students, probably more than in the University of Utah as a whole. But it felt very much like the two really distinct groups had to first learn to speak with each other. And I think that's where our collective processes are so critical. I will never forget sitting down at a document with something like 28 to 37 additional people. Everybody's writing together. Everybody has an opportunity for voice in that document. Everybody has an opportunity to sort of move through that document in different ways. And then that initial sort of brainstorming document where we all sat down together and just said, this is what I think an FODJ class should include, or this is what I think a study of design justice should include. And then we went in and were able to hone that, and people were able to sort of, again, navigate through, choose, they use their agency to choose their interests and the groups that they wanted to be a big part of. And they use their voice to enrich, to critique, to discuss, and with a lot of passion develop a really beautiful curriculum. And I think that's a really good segue onto someone who wants to focus on the collective process as part of their conversation.
Thanks. That's great, Lisa. I wonder if maybe, Jati, would you feel up to that and to share a little bit more about the process and about teaching it?
Sure, my internet's kind of bad, so I might turn off my video. Is it pretty stable now or not?
It's stable enough. If
Great.
it gets worse, but
Okay.
probably maybe the video makes sense.
Yeah, no worries. My name is Jati. I'm calling in from my post-crisis birthday. Shout out. Peggy, I think we've met before. So there were 5 modules as part of this seminar that this is how it kind of relates to one another. Module 1 introduces students, or I hate the word students, unless you want to demand tutelage, introduces learners to design justice, the big picture, how design has inherent biases and is culpable to systemic oppression. Learners reflected on how their identity has shaped their approach to design. And in module 2, community work plus power building, learners learned how to critically consider the limits of their role as an architect in community engagement processes, and they also explored power building in a co-design and within the built environment community. Module 3 specifically talks about infrastructure plus neighborhood, which takes a systems thinking approach to examine how historical patterns of injustice shaped our collective memory and signal who is valued, who belongs, and who does not. And I think that's a very poignant thing I wanted to say, because there was a interaction a while back before where we don't really understand who does not belong in these spaces and who does. Module 4 brings us to housing, which a lot of people find mundane, which looks at how discriminatory and exploitative planning policies have affected housing designs within architecture through topics such as redlining, restrictive covenants, and predatory lending, among other things. Bleeding hearts for millennials trying to buy houses nowadays. And then lastly, module 5, which is a workforce and economic development, which is explores the traditional and community-based models of economic development to examine how systematic patterns of labor and capital show up in urban systems, placekeeping, architecture, and design. All that's to say, all this was done with a lot of labor of love, setting up these modules. As I'm trying to echo words from Interim Dean Chin, and of course, former chair Henry. And I say these titles because it's important that we had admin support and instructor support in addition to, understanding that we're all just, there's no hierarchy in learning, right? And I'm going through quarter life crisis because it's like half of my people I interact with are looking up to me and think that I'm a teacher, and the other half think that I'm still, an 18-year-old, hence the hair. So cheers to that. I want to give this back to anyone else who wants to jump in because I'm always the pariah.
You never are, Jati. Thank you so much. And AL, would you please share a little bit more about the process itself?
Sure. Yeah, I'll share some of the process, and I'll also kind of like pass the mic to Bees too, who just entered, who can also speak to the process a lot. But what Jati said was great. That was a great overview, of course. The course was split into these 5 different modules so that we could cover all those different topics, and all those different topics came from that big brainstorm, that collective brainstorm, that kind of was like the birth of all those different ideas. And then basically what happened was there were like weekly meetings, I think they were on Sundays, where people would all be on the same call, and then we'd like split up into Zoom breakout rooms to work on each module, like a few people at a time together, to come up with like the readings and who could be a guest speaker. That was another kind of plus of having the modules, is that there were kind of really discrete topics where you could pull actual practitioners who are working on those topics to come and speak about those topics. And then we basically came up with a curriculum that's all readings or writings that are by BIPOC authors, and all of the people who came in to speak in the classes were also people of color. And that syllabus, that first syllabus that was taught in spring 2021 has since evolved a whole bunch because the class has been taught again. And I will now pass the mic on.
Yeah, definitely. And now, Biz, but I'm sorry, before we move on, I just want to ask a question. I know, AL, you had some experience teaching, right? But Jati, was this the first time you all taught? I'm curious a little bit about that experience also. You're muted, Jati.
Oh yeah, it was the first time I was considered as an instructor. Felt more like a TA, but nevertheless, ADU comps are still officers, and so no, it was an interesting experience to be given the veneration of being an instructor. I don't know how that necessarily ties into the main vision and missions of DMU, but it definitely gave me like baptism by fire. Give it a shot. So does that answer the question, Quilian?
Definitely. Yeah, no, I wanted to bring up that one of the things that DMU has always tried to do is pair folks with more teaching experience and folks with less, and that has been an incredible, like a consistent thing and now Jati's out in the world teaching amazing things. So some of the folks that have for the first time taught one of these courses, and yeah, thank you.
Could I tack on a few thoughts?
Yeah.
Hi, thanks for having me. I'll pick up, I think, where AL ended, to talk a little bit about how the course has evolved and how it's continuing to be a working model for us at DMU for how learning environments are co-created, right? So something that the language we've used quite a bit is of co-facilitators versus instructors or professors, which is, it doesn't mask the reality of power dynamics that still exist in those institutions, but it gestures at a mode that we want to be in. And so how does the co-facilitation happen? I think now for myself, having taught the FODJ course 2 times and worked with someone, Josh Budyangan, who's, I don't think he is here, most recently this past semester, the fact of having this critical mass of guest speakers throughout the course helps us to make it a new experience each time, right? Because the availability is very unwieldy, as everyone knows. Everyone is busy, and so just being able to have the skeleton of the modules and the experience of what we've done before, but then having Shaheen's perspective on something versus Quilian's perspective on something versus Jelisa or Curry, somebody, it's going to come out a slightly different way, which not only builds on the students' collective knowledge, but also I think reinforces the understanding that it's just as with the architecture lobby, it's many people's perspectives and many people's stories coming together. And so it's not like this one, you've not learned something wrong or different because the guest speaker lineup changes and the co-facilitators are different each time. And so as a co-facilitator myself, then we're moving readings around a lot. We're selecting new ones to represent a wider geographic or diversity of practice. And each of those pieces feels very fluid. And so, which maybe goes back to the admin piece of like having really supportive institutional partners, because none of these people are operating in a vacuum. And as I said, at the top of my comments, like, we're very aware of the realities that, and just trying to insert a new model. Okay, who can I pass to? I'm going to pass back to Quilian.
Thanks, Biz. Maybe we can begin to do a little bit of a transition between the design justice fundamentals and the neighborhood design fellowship project. And maybe Nupur, you can share with us a little bit both about your disciplinary experience, your experience co-facilitating, and as I remember, you were part of the group that could be helped create the design justice fundamentals, and then began to think about how to give it to another audience that was new even for us. Thanks, Biz. Yeah, I hope we're not going too fast for people not to introduce themselves, because I think everyone is interested in that. So thanks. And so Nupur, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So I'm Nupur Chaudhury. I am based in Lenape land, north of New York City. I am trained in both urban planning and public health, and I call myself a public health urbanist because I look at cities, communities, and connections through a grassroots lens. And so I'm a little bit of an anomaly in the Dark Matter University Collective, because I don't necessarily, although I am an adjunct professor at NYU, I don't necessarily have an academic home. My home is, and kind of I learn from communities that I'm in deep relationship with, both in the New York City area, so public housing communities across New York City, but then also north of the city in Buffalo, Niagara Falls, as well as in rural India. And so I always look at the work that we're doing through this grassroots lens and thinking about what it means to be thinking about this work through the lens of folks who have not spent a lot of time in academia. And so I'll just bridge a little bit as someone who was also a part of the development of the syllabus. There's just like 3 things that I want to highlight that I think for us at DMU is kind of like second nature to us, but I think it's really important to highlight. I mean, one, because of the fact that we did a lot of the work via Zoom, it meant that we were able to include folks who weren't necessarily in academic hubs or nodes that traditionally people think of. And so, I think that folks are introducing themselves from all over the country that are part of the DMU collective. I think that's really important to lift up the fact that Zoom technology allowed us to do that. And then also utilizing, I'm almost laughing when I say this because I think we all utilize it now, but the opportunity to utilize Google Docs and have real-time edits were really, really important too, because it actually pulled away from the idea of a syllabus being published and being done and being PDF'd to something that is dynamic and constantly changing and constantly evolving. And I think Bees and a couple of other folks that are part of the collective wrote a really, really amazing article in the JAE magazine. So I think that, Quilian, if you have that link, I would highly recommend that you go ahead and put that in. It was either JAE or a log, I can't remember, but it's all about that process of what it means when you pull away from kind of the dynamic and the timelining of the development, the publishing, the implementation, and then you go back, but it's this thing that's constantly evolving. So as someone who was a part of that and someone who has a very different lens, I was really excited to think about the fact that while we were teaching it in and facilitating it in academic institutions, we always had an eye around what it meant to bring this and have this syllabus be revised by community members. And so AL and myself, actually, while it was being taught in institutions for the first time, were thinking about and brought it to the Gowanus community through the Van Allen Institute Fellowship Program. And so Van Allen actually piloted a fellowship program where they actually paid Gowanus residents to be a part of, I want to say it was either a 6 or 9 month process where we were in community with each other. And that piece about having Zoom technology and Google Documents was really important, because the first, I would say from April until July, it was all online, which meant that there was no head of the class, right? We were all in the same Zoom room together, and we were very, very open that our intention is to learn from and edit the syllabus as it made sense for what was going on in Gowanus, and to make sure that this was a experience in which folks were able to utilize their understanding and their experience as tools that they could put in their tool belt and implement and pull out when needed, right? So for folks who are in the New York City area at that time, Gowanus was going through a rezoning. There have been many, many experiences that Gowanus community members have been recipients of. And so our intent was to think about what it looked like to have Gowanus residents be at the forefront and be proactive rather than reactive. AL, do you want to share a little bit about your experiences, anything that I left out as well?
Yeah, sure. I feel like that was a great summary. I would just add one thing that I think was slightly different from teaching foundations of design justice at like a university versus teaching in the community. I think one major difference was that we were able to evolve and pivot the syllabus in real time, which I think you mentioned, Nupur, but like in much more kind of like impactful or like drastic ways almost. Whereas like if you're teaching a seminar or a studio, you kind of have the whole semester mapped out. You know that there's going to be like a final project, you know there's going to be like the mid-review and the 3/4 review and stuff like that. When we were teaching the fellows in Gowanus, it was much more kind of fluid and checking in with people to see where they were at with the content and kind of connecting it back to their experience, like Nupur was saying. And then also like almost like kind of co-writing what the final project would be and letting that evolve. Because I think it was supposed to be just this like storefront installation about what the fellows had been researching for those like 6 months, but it became much more, it became deeper, it became more personal, and it became about like the Gowanus houses. Don't want to get too deep into it right now, but it's all on their website. There was like a flexibility to being in community that was really different from working just like in an institution.
One thing that I want to lift up that you did a really amazing job throughout that experience is that you created both in-person time for folks to actually react to and processing that this is what I understood or didn't understand, but also you did a really good job of creating anonymous surveys or anonymous feedback so that folks could actually share things that were not clear or things that needed more clarification, that the next week we could just literally go back into that, clarify pieces and understand what pieces needed more time around, or what pieces kind of were things that folks understood, or folks felt like they had a grasp of that.
Thanks so much, Hayal. Biz, I'm sorry, did I interrupt someone? Biz, you had a point you wanted to make.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Quilian. I just had one additional point to make, because there are a lot of incredible kind of like classroom or group facilitation strategies that Nupur and AL are talking about. And one thing occurred to me to share to this group of folks today about Zoom and FOD, Foundations of Design Justice. We got a lot of feedback this last semester in particular, now that students, so spring 2022, where students were that we worked with had a mix of in-person and virtual classrooms. And I had approached it kind of with this like, oh no, it's going to be virtual. It's going to be, you know, they're undergraduate students. They don't want to be here. But a lot of them, we had a really lovely conversation at the end where they shared that they really appreciated and that it was on Zoom, because we were talking about complex issues of race and gender and sexuality and sexual orientation and class and, you know, disability, and it was a lot. And they actually were like, we love that it was on Zoom, because it gave us a little bit of distance to of our like from our you know, to protect our vulnerability in the classroom space, and we could turn off our camera or just interact in the chat for a second, or just step away for a second. And that was something that was unexpected for me as a teacher, because I was under the impression, you know, I was feeling like I want to be in the classroom. So I just wanted to add that as a quick comment. Thanks, Quilian.
Thank you so much. I did wonder if we have a little bit AL or Nupur, if you wouldn't mind also talking about how the work that you've done with Van Allen has now folded back into the classroom, and some of the work in Buffalo, or yeah.
AL, that's all you.
Me? Did you call on me?
I did.
Yes, please.
I'll give a little bit of background, and then I'll hand it over to you. So I'll say that the way that it was set up was that the fellowship was designed to be from April until, I would say, probably the end of September. And we actually ended up extending it to the end of October, while that fall semester actually had a course at University of Buffalo in which Buffalo's architecture students were supporting the vision of the Gowanus residents. And so architecture students were actually taking the recordings from our class, understanding and listening to what Gowanus residents dreamt up or were demanding for their space and place, and understanding, as they were understanding kind of the principles of design justice, they were going ahead and translating that into visual representations. And there became a dialogue in which the Gowanus residents were in conversation with Buffalo students and vice versa. And then AL was able to take that and actually shape that into a course for the spring semester. So now we're talking about basically a full academic year of being in relationship with University of Buffalo to think about what community engagement could look like differently, right? Using that as a model in which Gowanus residents were centered in the work, and then architecture students were responding, rather than the other way around, which is usually the traditional model. Ale, did I set it up for you well enough?
Yes, you did. Thank you. You also gave me time to think. I was like, where am I? Who am I? Okay, so right. So spring 2022, after that fall studio, I co-taught with Semendi Bryce and Albert Chow, I think is his last name, to teach a studio at University of Buffalo that we called Design With, because we really wanted it to be about like thinking about what the community members want, starting with like the wealth of knowledge that we had already gathered from the Van Allen program and the fall semester studio. And then that spring, we also had 3 of the fellows visit the classroom via Zoom, to basically kind of present about their role in the community, their vision for changes in the community and to answer questions from students in the studio. And the students were tasked with coming up with engagement strategies and coming up with like interview questions, basically, to learn more about the spatial issues that community members were dealing with. And then they were the Gowanus members who were affiliated with the studio ended up being part of the mid-review and the final review as well. And the projects that the students designed were all cited in Gowanus. It all kind of clicked after they did, after we did a site visit in Gowanus. It was like right before spring break, I think. And yeah, and the projects, we sort of set up the sort of grading rubric to be like, one of the things that you have to do is package this information into a presentation so that community members could find it useful, could actually take it and run with it. And because they were working so closely with the different community members, that kind of came naturally, but it was like this connection that we had to make in order for that to happen. So yeah, we kind of translated it back. And I think the partnership is ongoing. We're still talking to one of the community members who got elected onto the, he's the tenant association president of Gowanus Houses. And so we're like, okay, like it's time to, like, this is what we've been talking about all this time. And it feels good to kind of know that the ball's rolling and things are kind of changing, and the work that we're doing, imagining different futures with community members, all of that'll be on paper and printed out can all be very useful in kind of like policy discussions too.
Thank you so much, Nupur, for that wonderful. We're gonna switch gears a little bit. And actually, you know, I'm gonna start out by asking Ozair to share with us a little bit about the structure of the next set of is the first studio modules that Dark Matter University taught, and I can then go in and give a little more context and then invite folks to share. But I wanted Ozair, as the administrator there at Carleton, who invited us, a little bit to just share a little bit about the course and why you went to Dark Matter University, etc.
Sure. Thanks so much, Quilian. My name is Ozair Saluji. I'm a faculty member at Carleton University. I'm speaking to all of you today from the lands of the Algonquin Anishinaabe here in Ottawa, Canada. Thanks everyone for having me join this evening. It's a pleasure to be with you. I'm a faculty at Carleton and formerly administrator. I'm actually speaking to you from the wonderful land of sabbatical, which I'm just trying to figure out right now, but it's pretty great. So, you know, maybe just a few quick thoughts about the studios at Carleton, and I'll lead, you know, like into talking a bit about sort of the some notions around collective administration. I guess that might be, you know, something that I've been thinking about over the past couple of years. But basically, the studios at Carleton where we're able to do this kind of work with DMU, for example, are called our option studios. They graduate option studios. They occur in the term between the comprehensive design studio and the thesis. And so students kind of come out of the thick and full development of a building, and they have a term of option studios, which then lead to a year-long thesis that they get to pursue a subject of their choice and a method of their choice. And these studios are you know, typically on a year-by-year basis, there are 4 sets of thematically paired 6 or 7 week studios that are separated by our February reading week. So in total, there are 8, you know, sort of micro studios that happen each year. Students ballot for their selections, and we wind up typically inviting faculty to Ottawa, you know, to stay for periods of time. COVID, of course, unfortunately short-circuited that, so everything was on Zoom. But when I started as an administrator in 2019, 2020, excuse me, in 2018, 1 out of 8 studios were kind of themed around these particular questions of design justice. That increased to 7 in 2020 and 2021, so 7 out of 8 design studios. and continued actually last year with 7 of our 8 studio offerings involving Dark Matter University faculty and others as well. And so it's a really significant point in the students' education where they kind of shift out of thinking about buildings, capital A architecture, as it were, into kind of the year-long project that they then proceed. One of the things that we've noticed and seen over the past few years is the increase in the number of thesis topics that engage with design justice questions and issues. And it's been significant, actually, in large part because of DMU's influence. So the first year that we taught these studios, Quilian and Jenn taught a studio, and Curry and Jelisa. Curry and Jelisa were invited back and taught again. And it was, I think, transformative for our, for our institution in Canada, in Ottawa, to have DMU be present. I think maybe just to wrap up with a few quick thoughts, I think one of the things that has struck me as an administrator transitioning out of this kind of organizational process is how we at our institution can actually create and sustain a culture of pedagogical values that values this kind of studio work and this kind of studio teaching, and importantly, the kind of faculty that are able to teach in that. Something that emphasizes, a collectivity in thinking, making, and teaching. I think that happens at the institutional level on a number of ways, having the right faculty, having the right fit of faculty. We recently hired an Indigenous faculty member to teach the studio on the Canadian North, which actually makes complete and total sense. And importantly, funding, actually being able to pay people and to be able to pay them fairly and to be able to pay them well. I think that there are some professional issues that are associated with creating a kind of sustaining a culture of pedagogical values. Andrew spoke about this a bit. I think in Canada, it's the Canadian Architectural Certification Board, in the US, of course, NAAB, how to deal with student performance criteria and embedding that as a kind of mandate mission. Secondly, I think having administrative adaptability and flexibility is something that we are struggling with and trying to fight and work with. And so how do we challenge and develop new protocols for scheduling and teaching and flexibility for faculty as well as students? And where do we need to resist institutional structures that actually deny the ability to do that, the possibility of doing that? And that's pushing up against institutionally the university writ large. And then lastly, I would say is partnerships that are beyond the school itself. I think cutting open the hermetically sealed chamber, the echo chamber of your own school, of our own school, and really inviting in voices that can start to critically probe and poke and productively and critically unsettle I think what we think of ourselves as teachers and in some way students at Carleton University. And that's been definitely, I think, through the benefit of working with faculty like DMU, from DMU and independent scholars elsewhere as well. It's been really helpful to be connected to DMU. Joining as a member, I think, means that there's a kind of resonance that can happen there. And so that overlap has been really productive, writ large. And so some quick thoughts, there about sort of administration at Carleton and the structure of our studios. And perhaps I'll turn it back to Quilian, maybe to see who this should, go to next. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Osair. I'm just gonna share a couple of I'm just gonna share one quick thing that I'm gonna throw it to Jelisa and Curry. But I just wanted to share that when Carleton and Osair originally invited us, DMU met up. We had never really taught studios before. We had a conversation. And almost by chance, I happened to be teaching a course in Cleveland. Well, not by chance, because I did teach at Kent State University. I had the urban design studio at Kent State University and had been creating kind of a community network, even during the pandemic. Actually, it had deepened during the pandemic. We're not post-pandemic, but at that moment of the pandemic where it was even harder, many things were even harder. And that had been building up. So finally, and I'm gonna share this. So one of the things that I had participated in as a core member of Dark Matter University is we created a call for courses that people may want to teach in the future. we put, so a couple of us were looking at that list, and when this call came in from Carleton, we said, well, Jelisa and Curry have this course that looks really interesting, and Jenn and I have similar-ish interest here. So we actually took even, I believe, a vote on it. And we selected the course that Jelisa and Curry had proposed already. But I think that that's also something that that was very valuable, and that it really it shifted some of the ways the Dark Matter University taught, is that putting out a call. What do people want to teach about, talk about? And then looking at those things and beginning to parse out larger thematics that Dark Matter University could begin to take on, or relationships, partnerships that could move on. So just to set the stage, we met up and we all decided that Cleveland, since all of us were in different parts of the country, made sense, since there was already kind of the work of creating, and then and I'll share this later, but the studio that we taught, that I taught here at Kent State, or there at Kent State, dovetailed the one that Jenn and I taught at Carleton as well, and it created a really large network. So although not officially paired like a lot of the fundamentals of design justice courses, it ended up having an institutional partnership that quite honestly even lived closer even to the student level. Next, however, I want to throw it over to Jelisa, maybe to get us started on some thoughts, and then Curry on the course that they on the studio module that they taught.
Actually, Curry and I discussed that Curry would start, and then I would go.
Perfect. However, it works out for you.
Hi everyone, I'm Curry J. Hackett. I'm calling I'm assuming Andrew's in Tallahassee. I'm calling about 40 minutes down the road from him. In a even smaller town called Monticello, Florida. Just wrapped up a year of teaching at University of Tennessee before heading off to grad school. But yeah, happy to be a core member of DMU with Jelisa. We, as Ozair and Quilian mentioned, we collaborated, or were invited to collaborate, I should say, on an option studio. It was, I think at the time, Jelisa's first time teaching, only my second semester or third semester teaching, but certainly our first time teaching a studio of this kind, and in the ways that we'll get into. I think when we first started teaching, we started thinking about this studio, we were kind of wondering like what would a studio look like in the context of DMU and the coursework that we had been kind of putting forth. How do we create a studio that would serve as a complement to the amazing work that was going on in the Foundation of Design Justice course? I think we found ourselves kind of centering being somewhat self-referential in terms of like kind of borrowing from our lived experience and trying to think about how architecture in the built realm can be interrogated in ways that kind of center the body, center collectivism. And we ended up kind of landing on Black culture production as a sort of the point of departure for like how we can kind of interrogate these notions of value, and value both as a sort of societal ideal, right? But also value in terms of like how we quantify worth and capital and labor. And so, yeah, again, we were sort of looking at a variety of Black performance sort of methods and strategies, tactics throughout the African diaspora, looking at some in the Caribbean, looking at some in Central America, the American South, the East and West Coast, the Midwest, to try to unpack the sort of socio-spatial patterns of these performance methods and try to kind of think of ways that try to ask like what do those practices tell us about the social cultural potential of the streetscape, and kind of how we think about property, how we think about program, and all of these things. We ended up, as Quilian mentioned, citing our studio work in this predominantly Black neighborhood of Huff in Cleveland, that has some really amazing work on the ground. some really interesting projects by some partners that we collaborated with that were friends of Quilian's, that really kind of sort of informed how we shaped the studio. We ended up having 3 groups sort of proposing these radically multimodal sort of streetscape proposals that kind of took over the street in these really interesting and surprising ways that were inspired by the earlier work that we did in the studio, which was these really rigorous analytical drawings of things like crip walking and Afro-Peruvian dance that try to kind of try to come up with this sort of radical place-making strategies in this neighborhood of Huff. And then finally, just I think throughout the whole studio, we were working very fluidly using Google Docs, to try to just extract ideas in real time in a kind of low stakes environment, challenging them to really rethink and reimagine how we even represent and kind of qualify architecture. In the end, we ended up with like 3 Jelisa doesn't like the word games when I say this, but they're these sort of interactive experiences, I'll say, that were fully immersive, and really tried to even change the final review format. So there's a lot of things that we were trying to unpack and trying to reimagine in the structure of what a studio is, how the architecture actually gets represented, and what is the deliverable, kind of getting away from that trope. And then what do we normalize in terms of subject matter, and what do we qualify as the sort of the genesis of architecture, I guess, in a studio environment. And I'll flip it to Jelisa to chat a bit about the second 4-With 2.0.
Yeah, I also want to note that I think part of the other thing that Curry and I were interested in together, and also are interested in together now, is thinking about legitimizing other contributions to practice, other contributions to creative practice, to methodology that aren't necessarily a part of any institution and are not named creative practice. It's like people are researching that don't call themselves researchers. There are people who are contributing greatly to our culture. And so in the second round, Curry and I we thought about a different way to approach the studio. And I think for me, it was my first time teaching in an educational institution in this way. So I think I obviously came into it with a lot more confidence this second round. And Curry and I, we decided to look at Baltimore, which is an area that I personally have some work that I'm doing there now. And we asked first our students to do a lot of reading. And so because we were already questioning language a lot previously, that in 2021, we thought, why don't we just start with language right away and think about things as simple as, what does it mean to see and to be seen through the lens of surveillance, through performance, racial theory, and just general intersectional theories. And our students read, I think, probably like 3 to 6 a piece, I think, readings. But then they sort of, individually they read, and then we got into groups, and there was just we just started with language. There was no image making at the very beginning. And then we started to make diagrams and mappings around these ideas. And really, I think that what was interesting is that I think Curry and I really were more comfortable with the emergent strategy that we're both interested in, and allowing that to come through. And this second round, it was subtitled Making a Scene. And the idea was really to think about performance and the filmic and the scenic of the everyday in some ways. And so instead of asking a group to first to invent, it's almost to say, how do we see with care, and how do we see with more consciousness, and how do we image our built environment? And so if anyone's interested, you don't need to watch it now, but I'm going to put it in the chat, because we had groups that ended up making films basically about this avenue, Greenmount Avenue in Baltimore. And I think along the way, Curry and I both every week were just very engaged with, the second an image was made or a scene was made, all of the conversations that would happen around it. And we had students, for example, making these intense models of nail salons. And so just by making the image, what are the conversations that occur? And how do we start to value or think about value and about other contributions to culture once we start to see it more deeply, observe more deeply.
Breaking news. Oh,
what's playing? Is that me?
No, that was somebody playing the film.
I think that's it, right? I think I wrapped it up, right, Curry?
Yeah. I mean, I think maybe I think we had a lot of great conversations afterwards after we were able to kind of compare the first and second, because I think there were some things that we thought worked really, really well that, I mean, I think have also influenced even my teaching at UT, and I'm sure Jelisa's and her other assignments, in terms of like the gradient of individual to collective work, and using those first couple of weeks as an opportunity to try to develop, to try to reinforce sort of individual voices, but at the same time, like try to find ways to synthesize a sort of collective tone or a collective set of priorities that we could kind of engage, that would kind of feed into whatever the final projects were. And I think also, I would say even more so the second time, I think there was a kind of like disarming sort of sense of just like a low stakes sort of environment that I think we did really, really well with sort of engaging the students in. So anyway.
Thank you all both so much. I'm just gonna share very quickly on our end. Jenn and I taught, and first I'm going to share a little bit about the pedagogical structure. Jenn is going to share about some of the things that she had been doing and been working on, and then some of the outcomes and some of the way that was developed in the studio. Ours was called Cooperative Futures. Partly it was based in that in Cleveland, there's now a lot of cooperatives, started with the Evergreen Cooperative that is very much framed and after the Mondragon cooperatives in Spain. Community groups have begun to take on those ideas and make them their own. So we're working closely with an African-American led group called Cleveland Owns that is doing more community-based cooperatives. So one of the questions was, how can those processes also not just change ownership models, but the spatial models as well, or the community. So it was how community groups that were not usually thought of as being part of the space building and development structures, how could they reimagine? So that was one of the goals, but it also was based on looking at the specific people making change already on the ground. As Curry already mentioned, Huff has been a community that at one point had the density of certain parts of Brooklyn. That now, if there's 2 or 3 houses in a block, it can be a lot. It was redlined. It was systematically disinvested after the Huff uprising in the 60s. It was punished for those uprisings, and now there are groups and communities that are rising up and kind of thinking about what's next for Huff. And I've always been very much interested in actually this is my second time. That was my second time teaching at Carleton. I had done it before, where I took students to New York City to look at Jackson Heights. To me, this is the future of democracy. One of the most diverse places in the world that somehow has the most political structures. And AOC, for example, comes out of there. But also beyond that, just the community groups, although, every corner changes. One corner is Bangladeshi, the next is Indian, the next is Colombian, whatever it is. And big LGBTQ community. We actually worked out of the Queens Pride House when the students came to New York. They thankfully I was able. They gave me their space with the students, and that's where we held workshops and conversations. But it was also based on body. So one of the things here is that the students really began by identifying individuals, people working there, and began to work from that. We began an urban design studio or an urban kind of scale studio at Carleton, looking at individual bodies, building for those individual bodies. And then the students, they were working in groups, had to negotiate their work, their project with another project. So for example, let's say I was looking at Andrew King, who was one of the people that was making some of the changes. He's at Technologies, owns a lot of, wanted to create an internet and park cooperative, parks that would be beacons of internet services and technology in the community. And another one was looking at someone, for example, actually one of the best examples, it actually didn't happen at Carleton, but it happened at Kent, which was when they looked at one specific person that had grown up in Huff, had gone to jail, had been in the carceral system. And I was working with a gentleman named Mansfield that was making wine and doing in Huff. But then those two people had to negotiate the things I had designed at that scale, and that would build another scale, the kind of unit scale, and then the building scale, and then the urban scale. The idea is that the projects would grow in scale through negotiation, mutation, collaboration, so that at the end every project had some of the DNA of all the other projects in the structure. And each project had to both work as a cooperative. It had to have a governance structure with it, with the people that they had thought of and looked at the beginning. And I'll let Jenn both share more about how that some of the things that they led to, as well as other things that she wants to share. Okay.
Thanks, Quilian. Hi, everyone. I'm Jenn Low, DMU core member. I'm also Associate Design Director at OpenBox, and we are a people-centered design research studio. But my home discipline that I hold dear is landscape architecture. So sort of like interest areas in working with Quilian and Jelisa and Curry is, better, reading and understanding land and better understanding people. So I think what was a really sort of valuable part of like this endeavor with all four of us as a collective is being able to also embody, the concepts we're trying to teach. And, that comes into talking about collectivity and also having our students practice that. So they worked in pairs for our 6-week studio for the entire duration. And then it grew. So like in pairs, and then they exchanged ideas and cross-connected their ideas and made mutations. And then there was like larger groups. And so there's a collection of interventions and proposals, but then they all had to, be in conversation with each other about its synergies to create like a larger collective plan that extended in sort of different ways in the urban fabric of the Huff neighborhood. So I think, us moving together and also a huge challenge, it's 6 weeks. So we're trying to also, enable like collectivity and embodying very different processes that like, are trying to challenge moving a little bit slower to get a little bit comfortable about noticing things about the process of making observations and noting, your interventions up and making observations about, the folks that we're having conversations with, like all the relationships that Quilian has in Huff between community leaders, organizers, planners, artists and technologists. So we're making like really like a micro level observations in order to make sort of like bigger ideas and imaginations that are very rooted in work that's already happening and like in systems that are already, coming into sort of cultivation. So I think it was great to see we had 6 projects of different types of cooperative scales and systems and topics and issues. And that was from like urban farming and apiaries and beekeeping to like a live work artist residency collective to a transportation collective that also served as like the neighborhood front porch at an intersection, to like amplifying like a church campus and what it affords as a, you know, a community like care systems in the neighborhood. So I think the sort of overarching, I think, pieces were two with like knowledge and where knowledge comes from. And it was great to be, you know, based on the relationships and like partnerships and collaborations that, you know, started, you know, for many years that Quilian has been like fostering in his work at Kent State and in Cleveland, where, you know, working with oral histories, we're having conversations with like, you know, existing friends and networks, as, you know, as the knowledge base for inspiration and aspirations, and really rooted grounding, not about like theoretical things, but like imaginations based on, you know, strategies, visions that are already being like connected hyper locally.
Thanks so much, Jen. And you know, we are very lucky to have two students here. We're gonna share a little bit from that, no students anymore, now professionals, colleagues, but two students from the module that Jen and I taught. So I'm gonna tee up at first, Rudo, if you wouldn't share a little bit just about your experience in this work, and you know, yeah. So Rudo.
Hi everyone. Sorry, I can't turn on my video right now. I just got home. But yeah, I'm really excited to be here. Thank you for having me. Unfortunately, my partner for this thesis, for this studio, Mira, she wasn't able to join, but she does say hello and she says thank you for extending an invite to her as well. For me, I think this experience was really unique in the sense that I did my undergrad at Carleton. And I think your undergrad is a very individualistic approach to architecture. Like the things that you're learning are really just about like you and your ideas. And even though you might have feelings about things to do with social justice, it's kind of hard to find a way to express it or to talk about it in an architectural way. And I think the studio was one of the few that I've ever taken that allowed me the opportunity to start to really like think about what, you know, like what we say architecture is about, essentially, this collective approach to really thinking about space and the built environment. It was a challenging studio because it was so short, but challenging in a really good way. You know, like from the beginning, you were kind of given, I guess like a starting point. For Mira and I, it was the church. So that's what we were kind of looking at the beginning. And, you know, I guess when we went into it, we're really thinking about it from a capital A point of view, where you're really thinking about like the fabric of the neighborhood, but you quickly start to, it quickly becomes a way of like thinking about history and thinking about, it animates the neighborhood in a certain, to a certain extent, I guess is the best way I can explain it. It made it feel a lot realer than it has in other studios. I felt like I was able to understand a site and to really kind of immerse myself in a site that I've never been able to do before. Well, up until that point, in such a quick way. And I think it's the way that it was, you know, like one group is focused on a certain aspect and then you're paired up with another group who brings in their information. And from that, you're kind of learning about this neighborhood in a really fast-paced way, but in a very rich way. So that's one thing I really appreciated about this studio.
Thanks so much, Rudo. And Thompson, I'd love to hear a little bit about your experience and your structure and and how,
Yeah. Hi. Sorry. Hi, everyone. I'm Thompson. I guess I'll also say that just to echo some of Rudo's points, like also doing my undergrad at Carleton, but taking a few years to work in the field, coming back to do my master's, this was like such a breath of fresh air in some ways to see such a diverse perspective of instruction instructors to come and teach. And myself and my studio partner, Minette, who also couldn't be here, I think I could say that both of us had experience working or doing community organizing in a capacity with in our own queer communities, and me in Toronto and theirs in Montreal and Halifax. And I think for us, our prompt was to look at community organizing in Huff, and we were drawn to a certain activist who was a social worker that specialized in trauma-informed care, but also a ballet dancer. And we really drew to her work, working with youth in the neighborhood, performing with youth activists to kind of envision different spatial interventions, and they kind of became this proposal for us to think about how the community could have a kind of like an urban tutu as like a cooperative where people or different organizers could borrow this resource of a tutu which would just be kind of like different spatial resources, furniture or funding that could be passed around so people could try on different interventions. So I think for me, just having fun with this different type of studio setup, collaborating with not just a partner, but with other classmates who think very differently, maybe also looking more at the built environment, and then us who were, I think we kind of had maybe a hard time bridging it to be something more social to something a bit more tangible. It was great that it was relevant, having direct connection to what people were working on the ground in Huff, and responsive and imaginative to how we could restructure different ways of teaching studio after 2020 and a lot of the outcries of representation and in the profession. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Thompson. And quite honestly, the idea of the pink tutu just is really one of the things. I mean, the church idea and the way the role of the church, the traditional African American church in building up collectivity is kind of an amazing. And the pink tutu, just as an idea, as an image, and as something drawn from an individual that was just a powerhouse, Lexi Lattimore in Cleveland, doing urban planning, urban design, social. So she's just one of the most amazing people ever, and a professional ballet dancer that's using that as anyway. I just wanted to editorialize that. Thank you so much, Thompson. So as I mentioned in the chat, you can begin to stack if you would like to share, and we have to, and that includes the folks that presented. If you have questions on what you've heard, things you want to go deeper on, we have 30 plus minutes to have a conversation. And Peggy, I don't know if there's something else that I should do.
Yeah, no. Now's the time for all of us, including those who presented, to ask for further information or ask questions or set up relationships with other sessions that have already happened. So yeah, if you want to ask, or if you want to speak, or if you want to tell, put stack and Quilian will call on you.
And just as a reminder, one of the questions that I asked is, what aspects of academia do you want to bring collective processes to? I think that's, again, even as an administrator these days, I'm really interested in the questions, especially as framed both by Osair, Lisa, Andrew earlier. And thank you. We have Tom Fisher, please.
Yeah, hi, great work, everybody. As a former administrator myself in academia, I'm really interested to hear what kind of impact all of this fabulous work has had and the thinking of your colleagues and of your institutions about a different way to think about higher education. I mean, I'm always struck that there's all this innovation that goes on in studios, but it's still captured within the semester structure, the institutional structure that we're all a part of, or many of us, some of us at least, are all a part of. While I actually think that, you know, Dark Matter University is an example of what higher education might be in the future. In other words, instead of always having to do this within the context of these antiquated institutions that we're a part of, how might this be a way to actually help our colleagues reimagine what higher education could be? So what impact did this have on the conversations with your colleagues, with the administrators in your departments, if any, and what impact do you see it having over a longer term?
It just dawned on me that we might need a stack for the answers as well, because I want to open it up to folks here, and there are so many wonderful folks that I definitely don't want to take this. So I don't know. I'm looking at an Andrew. Yeah, thank you, Andrew.
Tom, hey, no major impact yet. I think it was the first chip. I mean, I think when Lisa and I said we're going to do this thing and link the two schools, it was November, December, January, and 9 out of 10 kids already registered. So, and I think it's just the starting point. I think the first step is just to do it so people see it's possible. Okay, so I think first, and I think I'll call them the teachers and the administrators and all the people that made it happen. It was important just to do it and stop talking about it and figure it out as you're going along. So, you know, I think now at least some schools can say, oh, let me ask them how they did it. So you can't say it's not possible. I think you just have to, I think we just have to keep doing it over and over again, and it'll spread, and other schools will start to change a few things. I think right now it's very, it's still very insulated. I think there are only a handful of people at each school even knew what went on or how it was different, or you didn't want to tell anyone because you're going against the rules. And hey, I like my job. So I think it's gonna take time, but it also needs to be consistent. It's not a one-of, but it's built like the syllabus. It's all in process, it's all collective. And now it's a matter of learning from each other and how was it done different at Buffalo, Howard, FAMU, Tuskegee, Utah, and let's just continue to all evolve, but we have to share now. How do we share and keep it going?
Lisa?
Yeah, I think impact is so critical. And I do think that we have had a dramatic impact on the students that have had opportunities to work in this collectivity. We've had students that have come back and talked about being seen and seeing themselves reflected in the curriculum in a way that has never happened before. I do think with administration, it's so complicated though. As an interim chair, I was able to institute the DMU curriculum at the University of Utah, but now we have a new chair. And so that's one of the things that the institution does, is that rather than having an institutional memory that relates to the quality of the education and the progress that we're making, institutions have these positions. And as new people come into these positions, the work potentially that a previous administrator has done can be easily erased entirely. So I do think that that the structure of the university is one of the things that is kind of disruptive to this whole process. I do think that in my life going forward, the idea of collective work has become so critical. I feel like I come to voice as someone who was trained as an architect and in some ways trained as a facilitator to help someone else discover, realize their intentions. I feel like I shine best in a collaborative setting, right? When everybody's talking. And I do find that our students did the same thing. One of the points that I wanted to make earlier that I didn't have a chance to is that this collaborative process flowed into these classes so beautifully, where students were collectively building images and building documents on the Miro boards. When we talk about ourselves as facilitators, and then a student has an opportunity to also be a facilitator in the class, again, disrupting those lines of where is the knowledge coming from, whose knowledge is most critical, but understanding that knowledge can only truly be created in this sort of collective process. I think that there's some really incredible things that I will take with me through the rest of my career in academia. But I think in terms of how we push institutions open, I think that I think that impact is yet to be fully realized. And I think that the in addition to talking to administrator about what this course can do for the school, I think for me, talking to administrator about what this course can do for students, even though that's not always the top priority for administrator, having that conversation is critical so that our administrators begin to consider or think about that as they calculate their decisions in different ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. I put myself in stack. I wanted to make 2 quick points, and I hope I'm not stealing Carrie's thunder, but I just wanted to share that, one of the specific things that has happened is that some of the collaborations between, for example, Yale and Howard, and maybe I'll tee it up and I'll move on quickly and let Carrie actually say it. But the president of Yale has created structures because of things that people in this chat have done. Okay, so I'll move on and let Carrie do it. And then the second thing is that, for example, with Andrew, I'm hoping to have now that I have a certain amount of things that I can do this with, but have collaborations with Andrew. We tried last summer, and we're gonna try again. And the whole structure as DMU has created is something that I bring to every meeting that we're talking about, whether it's anything from honestly recruitment to relationships and who to invite to reviews, and that these kind of relationships and that is about relationship building, network building, about doing this work, and that we need to begin to collaborate, including a special project that I was working on in Pratt, in which I was able to invite Andrew, and Andrew created a network of folks that were able to come into this project. We didn't get it. It was something that we were going after kind of as an institution, as Pratt, as Florida A&M. But that collaboration structure is beginning to have it's being shown that it can work. And that is, as we all know in administration, the #1 thing that needs to happen, and that it brings something to the institution, as I think Andrew and other folks have talked about, that really this, for example, institution that I work at may need. I think next was Osair.
Thanks, Quilian. I just really wanted to echo some of the things that Lisa said. I think that turnover is a huge challenge. I shifted out of administration and curating these design studios over 3 years. Really grateful that my successor is as engaged and delighted to continue, I think, along the trajectory that we've established together over the past few years. And this has included making a commitment to DMU to host faculty from DMU for the next couple of years as well. And so I think building that into a kind of long-term trajectory of how you sustain sort of pedagogical values is really, a big deal. We have a new director coming in. I think, being tied to sort of life cycles of appointments is also potentially a challenge, especially when you're trying to create sort of sustaining efforts. I would say, just maybe to kind of respond to Tom's question too, I think that the impact has been teaching plus, that it's not just been the teaching, it's been the efforts that students have made in response to that, sort of holding faculty and each other to account, student initiatives that have also, started to kind of lend more emphasis and energy to administrative efforts to, kind of pursue. So that's actually been, been quite significant as well. And so.
Curry?
Yeah, you didn't steal any thunder, man. I feel like I actually was going to talk more about sort of my personal, I think what's great about DMU is that there's some really amazing work that's happening within the sort of like DMU community proper, right? And like where the DMU name is actually on the thing, on whatever initiative that we're putting forth. But I just want to like also speak to, as someone that's, joined the organization just after my first full year of teaching at Howard, and just finished my first full year teaching at University of Tennessee. It's the sort of more anecdotal experiences that have kind of leaked out of my experiences or been informed by my teaching experiences in DMU that are now informing my teaching experience or even means of research and study outside of, you know, the more kind of official DMU work. And even at my time in UT, I feel like the stuff that I was doing was largely, as I mentioned in my introduction, was largely informed by the studio work that I was doing with Jelisa, the collaborative seminar that I'm doing with Jerome Hayford, which initially combined Howard and Yale students, and then Howard and City College of New York students in the second year. You know, the ways that we are taught, that I'm teaching, that I'm now teaching was informed by all that work. And so I'm finding that the way that the students sort of engage the discipline, the way that they engage working with each other, there's just creating opportunities for peer learning, and sort of shortening that sort of power distance between professor and student, for instance. Like all of those things are things that I'm seeing that the students have kind of absorbed and seem really, really inspired by and excited to take into future years of school. But also I found that there was a lot of sort of surprise and intrigue by the tactics that I was using in the studio and in the classroom by my co-faculty. So even though I'm not returning back to UT, I feel like there might be, in a sort of smaller, more interpersonal, sort of anecdotal way, that there is some ways that these lessons and reflections can kind of be leaking into these institutions that we're affiliated with, even if DMU is not sort of, you know, stamping in a particular academic project.
Thanks so much, Kari. Jati?
Everyone has just been so great. I might remove my stack, but perhaps to the Twin Cities, to Tom, right? And some of the questions that you asked, and perhaps even in New Haven. I recently got asked this question, and this is about kind of online of what we're discussing right now, is impact. And you started with your retired admin, right? What do we call like a postdoc, right? The prefix of that is a doctor, right? And yes, for some reason, when we talk about leadership and administrative roles, you know, when we think of a doctoral program, we have, you know, when I bring this up about programs or thinking about doctors, is because Quilian mentioned it earlier. Tenureship, in my opinion, is what I feel like DMU could be better in focusing on impact. It's because we have this gig economy or gig academia kind of vibe right now, in my opinion. And I'm very critical about everything that, or I'm supportive, but also very critical about the things that we've sort of promoted. Because as much as we've tried to further the envelope, I think what has happened is that we've moved away sort of the veneration of like being in a secure position, right? If I chose to pursue a terminal degree in architecture or in academia, it would hopefully come at a pursuit of tenureship, so that I don't have to deal with that kind of like insecurity of, you know, jobs or stuff like that. So I asked everyone here, perhaps like a retort back to you, Professor Fisher, is what do you think the applications of the previous century might help in terms of trying to instill longevity? Because I feel like this gig economy, this gig academia isn't gonna work.
Thanks so much, Jati. Very important question, very important issue, and I think hopefully people will continue to stack with thoughts on that. Peggy?
I want to defer to let Tom answer that question. I'm going to be changing the topic. So Tom, please go ahead.
Thank you, Peggy. Yeah, Jati, I don't really have an answer other than I'm, you know, I just finished a book on the impact of pandemics on culture. And after every major pandemic, higher education goes through a profound transformation. I mean, the research universities that many of us are in really arose, particularly the public ones, after the cholera pandemics in the 19th century. The the community college system emerged after the 1918 flu pandemic. And so, you know, I think higher ed is at the precipice of an enormous transformation, in part by the very things that you're all working on, which is this relationship of the digital and physical, the idea of who are our students, what is a course, what's a community, how do we learn, you know, all of these are now questions that higher education is facing. I think a lot of universities are in denial. They're all trying to go back to the way it was, and they don't realize that we have just gone through a revolution, really, in thinking about this. That's why DMU is so, I think, profoundly important, is I think the things that we are all working on are really the seeds of where the future of all of higher education is going to end up going. And, you know, so that's just my thoughts, but I'm really just inspired by the work. And I wish that we had way more administrators here to listen, pay attention to it.
Thank you so much, Tom. Peggy?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to say, in reference to what Tom was saying, I think the universities post-COVID, or, you know, post-online learning reactions has really shown off how deeply conservative they are. It's, if we didn't know it before, we know it now. They're in a panic to hold on to, what can we say, their investments, you know, their hegemony, all those things. To me, it's really remarkable that it's not talked about more. What I was going to ask or maybe comment on is, I was struck by the Gowanus Fellows and the Van Allen supporting community fellows to be part of this school. And so all of a sudden, teaching isn't just to students, and the definition of student is broader, but so broad that one is teaching people who are not enrolled in an institution, which might be truly the cracking open of these institutions. And so I'm just curious to know whether that set into motion ongoing ways of that kind of education, or one was just so dependent on the particulars of the Van Allen supporting fellowships. I'm just curious.
Nupur, Nupur.
Sorry, I was gonna put stack, but then I realized that I wanted to respond, Peggy, to what you were saying. You know, a lot of what we've thought about at DMU is in terms of how do we work inside and outside of systems, right? And so part of it is challenging the idea that the academic institution is the institution of learning, right? And so that's part of the piece of why, you know, the classroom really was the community. And, you know, in response to, or kind of building upon that touchstone, community members then became co-instructors at Buffalo, right? We are very, very interested in and are thinking about how we can be in relationship with other communities in a similar fashion, so that residents are being paid for their expertise, which is their lived experience and their knowledge of space and place in their neighborhood. They are able to kind of bring that expertise to the table with other quote unquote experts from the academic world, and there can be a shared dialogue of change that can happen in space and place rooted in that location, right? Because what is happening in Gowanus is going to be very, very different than what's going to happen in different neighborhoods or different communities. And we're really open to having those conversations with different community spaces and places, and are ready to kind of right size that relationship and whatever it looks like. It happened to be that our first kind of dynamic was that there was an outside institution like the Van Allen Institute that was able to pay for these residents and their time to be in relationship with DMU. But we're also thinking about and looking at what it looks like for, let's say, a philanthropic organization to fund that work, so that we can actually pay for residents' time and then also DMU's time in that way. And so like, I'll leave that open for folks in terms of if there are other communities or other models or other approaches, because there is this vision of thinking about credentialing communities and credentialing residents beyond a master's in architecture or a master's in urban planning or a master's in landscape architecture, like all of those pieces.
Thanks
Or
so much,
universities
Nupur.
could be paying, we don't need to go to the philanthropics. The universities could do that, just.
Yes, and actually the thing is, Peggy, is that like we're open to that. We would love to know which institutions and universities would be willing to do that, right? Because the dynamic right now is that institutions are in community in a physical space and place, and there are one or two things that they reach out to community members about, right? Like whether it is a new building, whether it is a new development that that university is expanding on. And so is there an institution that is willing to change what that process looks like? That would be an institution that we want to be in conversation with, right? We're not really interested in saying like X institution, you are actually buying up land in this community and you need a community engagement process, right? Like that's not what we're looking for. What we're thinking about is what are the ways in which there are institutions that can be thinking about credentialing or thinking about kind of certifications in different ways beyond that traditional notion of a master's, a PhD, a certificate, right?
Thanks so much, Nupur and Peggy, for those questions. Lisa?
Yeah, I just wanted to mention, oh, am I? Yeah, I'm not muted. I just wanted to mention two other projects that are attempting to do similar things, because I do think that these, you know, that we can learn from, there are a lot of different avenues for achieving this. One is Maurice's Cox work as a city planner. In that case, the city actually paid for community members to help educate them about landscape architecture, to take them to examples of landscape architecture. And then those community members were actually the arbiters for architectural design competitions to redesign the city that he was working in. And so a really interesting model and one coming out of city planning. And the other thing I just wanted to mention was that here at the University of Utah, we've been working with the Navajo Nation for many years, building houses. And a colleague of mine, Shindana Yusuf, just wrote and received a series of grants to scale up that investment. And what she did was, I mean, she did have to go outside of the university to achieve it, but she actually formed an organization in Navajo Nation and wrote grants under the name of that organization, so that the money, rather than 50% of the money going into the university, as usually happens with these large grants, all of the money goes into the community. And the first things that they're doing with that grant are hiring people in the community to drive the entire process of development, building houses, building solar electrical grids. So getting electricity, getting internet connectivity, and getting housing to a community that has been deprived of all three of those things. And so in this case, it's the individual that really stepped out of the institution in order to do that. And, you know, there may potentially be consequences in terms of her relationship to the institution, but I do think it's interesting that there are people that are looking directly to, I mean, DMU is doing a great job of doing this, but I do think that there are some other projects that we can build on and learn from that are looking directly to community and paying community members and positioning community members so that they are driving this work rather than the universities. So I just thought that was worth mentioning.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I don't see anyone else in the stack. I saw a couple comments and thoughts. I don't know if those are official stack requests. So I'm gonna go down the line and say, AL, do you?
No other comments. I'm like, just listen to what Nupur and Lisa said.
Nupur, Shaheen, do you want to ask your question of Nupur?
The comments were really helpful. I echo what AL said. Are there precedents? I mean, Lisa, what you shared was helpful in getting me to think, yeah, there are precedents in those ways. But the credentialing thing, in a way, it strikes me as, yeah, really exciting. And I haven't heard of it, so I'm curious if there's just like a whole bunch of that kind of model that I'm not aware of. But at the same time, I wonder if it's a way for us to extend, that all that comes with the institutions and that kind of like embedded hegemony that Peggy was referencing earlier. So yeah, I'd love to look at precedents if there are any.
I mean, I think that Lisa shared two really, really amazing ones that we all get to learn from, and kind of, Lisa, if there's any links or anything like that, please share them with us, because I'd also love to kind of hear more about it. You know, I'll say for me personally, being based in New York City, one of the projects that I have been a part of like many, many years ago was challenging residents' role in local community boards and how they were trained in that role, right? So there was this idea that local community boards in each neighborhood have decision-making power in certain ways, but they weren't necessarily trained. And so there was an organization at that time called the Municipal Art Society that created the Livable Neighborhoods program. That was a very general kind of training of like, what is a community board? Like, what are things that you can be changing in your neighborhood, et cetera, and actually took that curriculum and grounded it within the public housing community that I was working with in Brownsville, Brooklyn, to say, what would we change about this so that Brownsville residents are better equipped to be stepping up to the community board and being an active participant and being able to challenge kind of governmental forces that have been imposing their ideas and beliefs in their neighborhood, right? So that's it. It's another precedent, and so that was actually the only time that that training was adapted specifically for a specific neighborhood. I think there needs to be more around that, because the way policies and practices hit each neighborhood, it manifests itself very, very differently. And so you can't have a general curriculum, right, in any of these spaces and places, but also the idea of what an expert is, the idea of what needs to be taught also gets to be challenged, right? So a lot of the work that, you know, I do as someone who is in relationship with communities is one where AL and I kind of really took this to heart, and we said, we may have a master's in urban planning or public health or architecture. We do not have a master's in Gowanus, right? And that it means that we need all of these expertises at the table together, and they have equal footing in this conversation that we're having. Even that the master's in Gowanus matters more because AL and I can act as translators or kind of those types of roles, but we don't have that lived experience that is needed in this conversation. And so kind of that dynamic is in opposition to academia, right? Like that dynamic is like a tension point in terms of what it means to have a master's in blank or a doctoral degree in what name. So I think the entire idea needs to be challenged. And so I'm excited to hear about other examples in different places and spaces. As someone who is not in academia, I think it's great to be in relationship with academia and also understand that academia holds none of the answers in what we're trying to build.
Thank you so much, Nupur. And finally, Peggy. Peggy?
Yeah. I just want to say one thing. This isn't what I raised my hand for, but you know, and challenging academia also challenges licensure, and so I think there's a big, deep connection there. And so I hope that if we're thinking this through, it would go up to that level. Anyway, the reason I raised my hand is that we've asked all of the sessions to come up with action items that will allow us at the end of the week to really look at what the sessions have yielded for what we do to organize to go forward. I would just say that I think Dark Matter University is all an action item, and so in some way we're all getting examples of the action items. But I didn't want to be delinquent in terms of, you know, the duties of an organizer, to just put out there the possibility of those of you who presented and all of us here to think of action items that maybe are different than the ones we've talked about, or tie together, or relate to schools that don't have the same issues of inclusiveness in the way that you've organized, but maybe have other issues, whether those are environmental. So I'm just putting out there action items. We probably don't have time to talk about it, but just to lay the seed for those of you who presented today to think about whether there's something above and beyond that allows your work to be built upon by other institutions.
Biz?
I just wanted to say quickly, because I know we're at time, but Peggy, thank you. That's so wonderful. And this whole time I've just been thinking, I mean, ABC school, like this is part of, like this is one of those models that DMU is always thinking about. And there's so much of the work that everyone has shared in this session and the other sessions that's just about communicating and connecting each other and the work and connecting the work that's already happening. So I think that's a huge, it's not just, there's other actions we should take beyond this, but I think just acknowledging the action that's happening right now of connecting with each other about it. It's something that comes up a lot. There are several architect lobby members in DMU. There are designers protest members in DMU. There are folks who work on US Architects Declare that, so there's just like amazing work. And we're always constantly being like, oh my God, if we had unlimited hours, like how can we just make sure that all of the work stays aligned and that we are amplifying each other's actions and each other's work, because, Architecture Lobby, for instance, has just paved a way for a lot of conversations that have happened overall. And then with this like burst of energy, from in the last few years in terms of organizing, we've been able to go beyond. So yeah, exactly. Thanks, Eyal, for the list. But that was just my quick gratitude and, and we're going to keep, the ongoing practice of all of it.
Completely agree, Biz. And I put myself on stack just to say, for example, the provocation that Jati made, it seems like the perfect ABC school lobby, DMU, DAP issue, right? Tenure and literal kind of the precarity of faculty, which keeps a lot of people color from even coming into school, into academia. So there are these moments that could cut across and can use potentially some of the processes that we've talked about.
It's right at 7 o'clock. I think that's really helpful. I think that's a very focused way of thinking about an action item that nevertheless has implication for a lot of the other things that we're talking about. Rethinking that as a kind of disruption that trickles down at many different levels. Let me just formally thank all of you for a totally fascinating session and amazing work that you're describing to us. We're all very thankful and very grateful. So much work here. So yeah, all of you come to other sessions. I think this really is part of threading these different conversations together so that they have impacts with each other. So anyway,
thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.